Rain splashed off luxury car hoods like spit on silk. Robert Phillips clutched the arms of his wheelchair, knuckles white. "Move faster, Wheels," one boy mocked, kicking a sneaker at the footrest. Another leaned in, filming with shaky hands. "Gonna cry for daddy's jet, rich kid?" The umbrella above Robert tilted just enough to let the rain in. He blinked fast, trying not to flinch, trying not to break. And then, just as the kick came harder, a shadow fell over them. Leather shoes stepped between the boys and their prey. A voice rasped low and calm. "Put your phones away, and pick him up." Silence. Not the kind that asks for permission, the kind that warns you not to make the same mistake twice. The bullies backed up, no longer smirking. Even the rain seemed to pause for a moment. Because no one expected to see him. The ghost with the name that still made certain men whisper. Alessandro Trevor. Once a feared name in backroom whispers in court files. Now just a man in a long coat, staring down schoolboys like they were problems he already knew how to solve. If you've ever watched someone stand between right and wrong without lifting a single fist, if you believe justice doesn't always wear a badge, then lean in. Because this is the story of a billionaire's son who didn't need rescuing. He needed someone who noticed. And the man who did was the last person anyone expected. Before we begin, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. Rain had a way of rewriting everything. The night after the incident, the city lights outside Robert's window shimmered through streaks on the glass, each droplet racing to the bottom like it had somewhere to be. He sat in silence, watching the reflections of passing cars crawl across the floorboards. His wheelchair hummed softly when he shifted, the motor's faint whir the only sound in the room. Somewhere down the hall, his father's voice carried through the phone. Calm, practiced, businesslike, cutting deals while his son replayed a stranger's voice in his head. "Move." Now. It had been a year since the crash that changed everything. One careless driver, one stretch of wet highway, one scream that never left Mathew's mind. The SUV had flipped twice, the metal folding like paper, and when it stopped spinning, Robert was conscious, trapped beneath the weight of twisted steel. The doctors had said the damage to his spine was permanent. They'd used words like, quote, mobility impairment and adaptation, but to a boy who once loved climbing fences and racing the wind, those words sounded like life sentences. The hospital smelled of bleach and quiet grief. Mathew visited daily at first, in tailored suits and a smile that strained at the edges. He brought gifts, tablets, books, noise-canceling headphones, but no laughter, no stories. He told Robert he'd build the best recovery team money could buy, and he did. But every night, when the machines beeped in rhythm with his son's heartbeat, he still found excuses to leave early. "Emails can't wait, Robbie," he'd say, even though Robert never asked him to stay. Mathew loved his son. No one doubted that, but his love came wrapped in transactions. When Robert was discharged, their penthouse was renovated with ramps and voice-activated doors. His wheelchair was custom-built, imported from Germany, sleek enough to look like a luxury car. Therapists rotated in and out of the house like clockwork, adjusting his posture, retraining his muscles, encouraging optimism. But what Robert wanted wasn't optimization. It was presence. He wanted someone to look at him and not see the machine first. He started keeping notebooks. Small, leather-bound journals lined the bottom drawer of his desk, each one filled with sentences that never found their voice. "Dad, I miss when we used to play chess. I'm still scared when it rains. Do you even remember my favorite song?" Each page ended with the same unfinished thought. "I wish you saw me." But Mathew, always late, always rushing, never opened a single one. He mistook silence for strength. School was supposed to be a return to normalcy. Regency Hall, with its marble floors and chandeliers, promised excellence. Whatever that meant for a 12-year-old who couldn't climb stairs. The staff smiled too wide, offering help that came with pity instead of patience. His classmates, glossy-haired children of senators and CEOs, whispered things their parents would never say aloud. "Poor little robot," one muttered once, watching his wheelchair glide past. The laughter that followed was thin, but sharp enough to cut. Robert learned early that cruelty wore cologne. It didn't shout, it smirked. It came in the form of a chair moved just out of reach, A whispered joke he wasn't supposed to hear. A teacher who pretended not to notice. He became invisible by necessity, shrinking into corners, pretending to study when all he was doing was surviving. Even the janitor pitied him, calling him champ, with a voice too soft to mean anything real. He didn't want pity. He wanted equality. Mathew's solution was to add more people to the problem. A new chauffeur to drive Robert to school, a bodyguard to blend in, a tech tutor who built apps to track his academic progress. None of it mattered. His father was everywhere, except where Robert needed him most. He called twice a day, once in the morning, once at night, but their conversations were just checklists. Did you eat? How was therapy? Good job, son. Click. Silence. Loneliness filled the space between words. Some nights, Robert wheeled himself to the edge of the balcony. The city looked different from 12 stories up. Smaller, manageable, almost quiet. He'd stare down at the headlights on the expressway, tracing invisible patterns in their motion. The wind against his face reminded him of the way he used to ride his bike, eyes closed, trusting gravity to take him home. But now gravity was something he feared. Everything that fell in his world stayed broken. Mathew, meanwhile, kept rising. His company, Phillips Innovations, broke another record that quarter. New investors, new partnerships, new praise. His face graced magazine covers under headlines like "The Mind Behind Tomorrow." But the man who built a global empire couldn't build a bridge to his own son. He justified it with purpose. I'm securing his future. But what good was the future when the present was hollow? The guilt sat beneath his ribs like a weight he didn't acknowledge, because acknowledging meant stopping, and stopping meant feeling. At school, the bullying grew bolder. Phones became weapons, laughter ammunition. One afternoon, they trapped him by the lockers, tilting his chair until his backpack spilled open. Papers fluttered across the floor like snow. "Guess your butler's off duty," one sneered, kicking a crumpled test toward him. Robert didn't cry. He just stared at the wall, counting the tiles until the sound of sneakers faded. Later, he would write in his journal, "The walls don't hurt me, people do." Every bruise healed, but the silence stayed. Teachers looked away, afraid to upset the parents who funded the school's art wing. The principal sent polite emails. "We're addressing this internally." They never did. Robert stopped mentioning it altogether. What was the point? When justice had a price tag, some kids were simply too expensive to defend. Then came that Thursday afternoon. The drizzle had started just as the final bell rang, streaking silver against the school gates. Robert waited under the awning, adjusting his umbrella's crooked handle. The same group of boys lingered nearby, their laughter rising above the sound of rain. He told himself they'd leave. They didn't. The shove came fast, the words faster. And then, him. Alessandro Trevor wasn't supposed to be there. Rumor said he owned the rundown garage 2 blocks away, a place that smelled of oil and regret. But that day, he walked straight into the storm, his coat soaked, his eyes unreadable. He didn't yell or threaten. He just stood. Power didn't need to shout. It breathed quietly. The boys scattered, and Robert sat trembling, unsure whether to thank him or be afraid of him. That night, the video spread across the internet like wildfire. Mafia boss saves disabled kid blazed across headlines. Millions watched a grainy clip of Alessandro's jaw tightening, his voice echoing over the rain. Pick him up. No fists, no fight, just authority. The internet turned him into a folk hero overnight. And Robert, for once, wasn't a victim in the story. He was a headline too. Mathew saw it after dinner, the tablet glowing cold in his hands. The frame froze on his son's face, pale, shaking, drenched. His breath hitched when he saw the man beside him. That look? That calm danger. Mathew's world, built on power and control, suddenly felt fragile. The one thing he couldn't buy had walked straight into his son's life and done what he never did. Showed up. Robert didn't know what to call the feeling Alessandro left behind. It wasn't gratitude exactly. More like recognition. Someone had looked at him without pity, without seeing the wheelchair first. For the first time in years, he felt like a person again. Not a patient, not a headline, not an error, just Robert. He opened his journal that night and wrote something new. No anger, no sadness, Just 5 words. He didn't look away first. He traced the sentence twice, pressing hard enough to tear the page. Somewhere deep inside, a spark caught flame. Small, quiet, but steady. It was the first thing in a long time that felt alive. In another room, Mathew sat in silence, replaying the video until dawn. The rain outside had stopped, but inside him, the storm had only just begun. The city didn't sleep the night the video went viral. By midnight, hashtags like #WheelchairWarrior and #Alessandro Trevor were trending across multiple platforms. Comments flooded in by the thousands, some stunned by the calm authority of the man in the raincoat, others desperate to know who he was. News anchors played the clip frame by frame, slowing down the moment his voice sliced through the noise. Move, now. What fascinated the public most wasn't the act itself, but the terrifying control behind it. By morning, online sleuths were already unearthing fragments of a life no one had spoken about in years. Someone found an old court file, sealed in New York, under the alias Anthony Villaro. Others posted grainy surveillance stills from a 2012 warehouse raid. One frame showed Alessandro, younger but unmistakable, flanked by men with broken noses and tattoos. The name Trevor Syndicate resurfaced, a name once synonymous with quiet brutality, clean hits, and a loyalty code so tight even the FBI called them untouchable. But then it had all gone silent. No headlines, no arrests, just vanished. Until now. Speculation exploded. Had he cut a deal? Had he gone underground? Had he faked his own death? Conspiracy threads sprouted like weeds, filled with screenshots and timelines. A blurry photo confirmed what many guessed. Alessandro Trevor was now running a one-bay garage on Ashfield and 10th, the kind of place you drove past without noticing. But now everyone noticed. That quiet old man with the scar beneath his eye had just shut down 3 private school bullies without lifting a finger. At Phillips Innovations, the glass tower where silence was golden and distractions forbidden, the atmosphere shifted. Mathew stood in his office, jaw locked, as headlines scrolled across his tablet. Ex-Mafia ghost defends tech billionaire's son. Mob justice or father's failure? That one hit hardest. His assistant, Carmen, hovered nearby, unsure whether to speak. Eventually, she did. He's real, she said, placing a printed dossier on the table. Alessandro Trevor. Born in Sicily. Moved to New York at 16. Rose fast. Fell faster. No confirmed sightings in 8 years, until your son. Mathew stared at the photo. Alessandro younger in a sharp black suit, sunglasses shading cold eyes. The man in the photo was ruthless. The man in the video? Something else entirely. Still dangerous, still composed, but older now, more restrained. Mathew exhaled through his nose and said, "Find him," quietly. The address Carmen gave him was in East Briar, a part of the city Mathew hadn't driven through in years. He sent a driver first, then a courier, then a private investigator. Each returned with the same message. He's not interested. Alessandro didn't answer the door. He didn't return calls. A boy in coveralls from the garage said it best. If you're not bleeding or 13, he's not talking to you. Mathew didn't like being ignored. In boardrooms, his voice could crash markets. One word from him reshaped product lines, closed 7-figure deals. But here, nothing. No leverage, no response. Just the sound of cars being fixed behind shuttered garage doors. Desperate, he sent a handwritten letter. No assistance, no logos, just his words on thick stationery. "Thank you for defending my son. I would like to speak face to face. Name your place." It was returned the next morning, unopened. Mathew didn't tell Robert any of this. His son had started smiling again, quietly, carefully, but it was there. He spent more time near the windows, his journals collecting dust. He even asked to go back to school early. Whatever Trevor had done, it worked. And yet, Mathew couldn't let go of the unease. He needed to see the man again. Not just through a screen, not filtered by public frenzy, but up close. He needed to understand what kind of man steps out of the shadows to defend a stranger's child, and then vanishes again. Alessandro, meanwhile, kept his head down. The garage stayed open but unbothered, shielded by its reputation. Locals had always whispered about him, good with engines, keeps to himself, scary quiet. But after the video, people dropped off more than cars. A bag of homemade food. A handwritten note from a mother who said, "My daughter came home crying less this week. Thank you." He read them all. He responded to none. At night, he sat in the back office, the lights low, a bottle of something old beside him. On the wall hung a photograph. Faded, cracked, its edges curling. A boy, maybe 10, smiling with missing teeth. Alessandro's hand on the boy's shoulder. They stood in front of the old Brooklyn dojo, long since burned down. He sipped slowly, whispering to the picture like it could hear him. This time I didn't wait too long. The past haunted him, but he didn't run from it. He just didn't owe it anything anymore. He had made peace with exile, traded blood for solitude. But children? Children were different. They hadn't earned the pain adults passed down like heirlooms. That's why he stepped in. Not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but because somewhere out there, a father didn't protect his son when it mattered. And Alessandro had sworn, after everything, he would never look away from that again. So when Carmen returned a second time, holding a check Mathew had signed, a blank one, Alessandro finally spoke. "I don't take money for doing what a man should have done himself." He handed the check back, oil-stained fingers pressing it against her manicured palm. "Tell your boss something for me." Carmen nodded, unsure. Alessandro's eyes narrowed. "I protect kids, not adults who failed them." The message landed like a slap. Mathew read those words 3 times, lips pressed in a hard line. For a moment, he almost crumpled the paper, but something stopped him. Maybe it was shame, maybe it was respect. Either way, he tucked it into his jacket, folded once. That night, alone in his study, Mathew played the video one more time. Not the version with music, not the version slowed down for drama. The raw one. The rain falling, the slurs, the laughter, and then that voice. Rough, aged, undeniable. "Pick him up." Robert's eyes wide, his shoulders trembling, and the quiet afterward, the kind that comes only when power shifts. For the first time, Mathew saw what Robert must have felt. Not fear, but safety. Not from a bodyguard, not from a therapy plan, but from a man who chose to stand still while others looked away. What do you think? Can a man with a violent past truly protect innocence better than those who claim to be good? If stories like this challenge what you thought you knew about justice, hit subscribe, because sometimes the most unexpected heroes carry the darkest histories. The first time Robert saw the garage in person, it didn't look like much. A faded sign read Trevor and Sons, though no one had seen a son around in years. The bricks were weather-worn, vines curling around rusted gutters. One of the overhead doors stood half open, casting a narrow shadow across the cracked concrete floor. It smelled of engine grease, old metal, and something else. Something Robert would later recognize as history. He hadn't told anyone he was going. Not his nurse, not the school, and certainly not his father. With his tablet tucked beneath his jacket and a rideshare driver who didn't ask questions, he rolled up to East Briar with his heart rattling faster than his wheels. For once, it wasn't fear of bullies. It was the feeling you get just before stepping into a place you were never meant to find. Still, when the car pulled away, he didn't look back. Inside the garage, everything was motion and silence. A boy his age might have called it clutter. Robert saw patterns. Tools hung with careful symmetry. Engine parts lay disassembled but not discarded, like puzzles waiting for the right hands. And there, hunched beneath a lifted Dodge Charger, Alessandro Trevor's boots peeked out, scuffed, and black as rain clouds. Robert cleared his throat. "Hi!" There was a clang, then stillness. Alessandro slid out from under the car, rag in hand, brows raised. He didn't smile, didn't scowl. He just looked at Robert, like he was one more engine showing up with an unknown problem. Then he said, flat and low, "Your old man know you're here?" "No," Robert answered, lifting his chin. Alessandro nodded once. "Good." He turned back to his work without another word. Robert blinked. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe a lecture or a handshake. What he got was silence. So he wheeled forward slowly, navigating the gaps between parts and shadows. After several minutes of quiet clinks and scrapes, Alessandro spoke. "You ever fix a carburetor?" "No," Robert said, But I've broken a few drones, Alessandro grunted. Same idea. Both stop working when they get gummed up with the wrong fuel. Robert tilted his head. People too? Alessandro looked over his shoulder, eyes narrowing just slightly. You catch on fast. That was how it started. They didn't talk about the video. They didn't talk about school. They talked about screws and fuel lines and balance. The kind you needed to lift a chassis, and the kind you needed to stay standing in a world always pushing sideways. Alessandro didn't explain everything. He dropped pieces of wisdom like lug nuts, letting Robert pick them up or leave them. Engines don't lie, he said once. They tell you exactly what's wrong, if you know how to listen. And later, sometimes the part ain't broken. It just wasn't fit for that machine. Robert didn't understand all of it. But he kept showing up. 3 days later, he came again. This time with a bag of donuts he couldn't eat. Just a thank you gesture he barely spoke aloud. Alessandro took the bag, set it aside, and handed Robert a socket wrench. If you're gonna hang around, make yourself useful. They worked in rhythm, unspoken but understood. When Alessandro talked, it was always wrapped in metaphor. See that cracked hose? Don't patch it. Replace it. Half fixes just delay the inevitable. Robert nodded, hearing something deeper. Something about the way he'd been treated by teachers, by peers, by a father who meant well but never stayed long enough to understand the damage. On the 5th visit, the garage was quiet. No music, no engines. Just Alessandro, sitting on a stool with an old photograph in his hand. Robert didn't speak at first. He knew better now. Alessandro held the photo between 2 fingers, thumb brushing the corners like they were too fragile to grip tight. His name was Leo, he said at last. Robert looked over. The photo showed a younger Alessandro with a boy, maybe 9 or 10, smiling with 2 teeth missing. He looks happy. He was, Alessandro said, until the world taught him not to be. Robert waited. Alessandro didn't like questions, but this one had to be asked. What happened to him? Alessandro stared at the photo for a long moment. He trusted me to protect him. I didn't. That's all that matters. The words hit harder than any curse. They echoed in the steel ribs of the garage like a confession. Robert didn't press. He just nodded, heart suddenly heavy. I used to think power meant keeping everyone afraid, Alessandro said. But Leo, he needed me to be present, not feared. I didn't get that in time. The silence afterward was full. Not empty. Not awkward. Just full. Later that day, Alessandro rolled out a tarp covering something Robert hadn't noticed before. His chair. But not the one he'd come in. This was different. It was sleek but rugged, reinforced at the frame, with oversized wheels and a low-slung battery pack mounted beneath the seat. The cushion was memory foam, molded with precision. The joystick had been replaced with a custom controller, smooth and responsive. On the back, stenciled in matte silver, was one word: stand. Robert blinked fast. Is that for me? Alessandro grunted. No, it's for the other kid I know who likes midnight rides through East Briar. Robert let out a laugh. Quiet, surprised. Alessandro's voice softened, just enough. You needed something stronger. Not because you're weak, but because you've been carrying too much. Robert rolled into the chair slowly, his fingers curling around the new controls. It moved like silk, smooth, sharp. His reflection in the garage window didn't look like a boy being helped. It looked like a boy being armed. You didn't have to do this, he said. I didn't have to step in that day either, Alessandro replied. But some things, you do. Not because it's owed. Because it's right. Robert stared at him, wheels still, heart racing. Thank you, Alessandro shrugged. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you hit a curb and don't flip over. But Robert didn't laugh this time. He just looked at the man in front of him, the quiet mechanic who once ran empires in the dark. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. An invisible thread, stitched in silence, forged in scars. That night, Robert wrote nothing in his journal. For once, the page stayed blank. Not because he had nothing to say, but because, for the first time in a long time, he didn't need the words to feel understood. The black sedan rolled up to the garage just after noon, its polished frame absurdly out of place beside the cracked sidewalk and oil-stained curb. Mathew stepped out slowly, his reflection ghosting across the tinted window before he shut the door. He looked out of place here. Tailored suit, $1,000 shoes, and a watch that could have paid off the whole block. The scent of burnt rubber and gasoline clung to the air like something alive. For once, Mathew didn't check his phone. He stood still, uncertain whether he was intruding or trespassing. The garage door was open. A half-dismantled motorcycle balanced on a lift. Alessandro Trevor was hunched over the frame, his sleeves rolled, forearms streaked with grease. The man looked exactly the way the internet described him, worn but unbent, built from silence and discipline. He didn't glance up right away. Only when Mathew cleared his throat did Alessandro lift his gaze, eyes sharp enough to stop a man mid-apology. "You lost?" he asked flatly. Mathew straightened, slipping a business card from his pocket as if it were a weapon of courtesy. "No, I believe you know who I am." Alessandro didn't take the card. His rag swiped across the metal, slow and deliberate, the sound louder than any reply. Mathew continued, trying to sound composed. "I wanted to thank you. You didn't have to help my son. What you did, it meant something." He hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his coat. "I'd like to offer something in return." Alessandro's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to Mathew. "What's that?" "A gesture," Mathew said quickly. "For your kindness. For your discretion. There's been a lot of attention online, and I'd like to." The sentence didn't finish. Alessandro dropped the wrench with a clang that cut him off mid-word. "You'd like to what? Pay me to forget your failure?" His tone wasn't raised, but it carried more weight than a shout. Mathew stiffened, trying not to flinch. "It's not like that," he began, but Alessandro's laugh was dry, humorless. "It's exactly like that." He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You think money fixes everything. That's the problem with men like you. You build towers so high you stop hearing what's happening on the ground." He jabbed a finger toward the street. "That boy of yours didn't need a CEO, he needed a father. But you can't buy that, can you?" Mathew's throat tightened. "You don't understand," he said, voice low. "I've been providing." Alessandro cut him off again. "You've been appeasing. Providing is easy. Showing up is hard. I've seen your kind my whole life. Men who confuse control with care." His voice dropped, rough like sandpaper. "You don't throw cash at a kid's dignity. You show up. You stay." The words landed like blows. Mathew tried to look away, but Alessandro wouldn't let him. His stare was relentless. A mirror held too close. "You think I'm judging you?" Alessandro continued. "I'm not. I've been worse. But at least I learned something. Money can't raise a soul you didn't bother to meet." For a moment, Mathew said nothing. The envelope in his hand suddenly felt heavier than it should have. Slowly, he set it down on the workbench, next to a jar of rusted bolts. "I'm not proud of how I've handled things," he admitted quietly. "But I'm trying." Alessandro leaned against the lift, crossing his arms. "Then start by listening to him, not to what he says. Kids lie to protect the people who abandon them, but to what he doesn't." The garage hummed with silence after that. Engines waited mid-repair. The city outside carried on, uncaring. Finally, Mathew nodded. "You're right," he said. "I haven't been there. Not really." He paused. "But I want to change that." Alessandro studied him for a long time, his expression unreadable. "Then don't tell me," he said. "Tell him." That night, the penthouse felt unfamiliar. The lights were dimmer, the silence heavier. Robert was in the living room, the new wheelchair gleaming under the glow of the fireplace. He was reading, or pretending to. Mathew stood in the doorway for a full minute before speaking. "That's a nice chair," he said softly. Robert looked up. Alessandro made it better. "I know," Mathew said. "I met him today." Robert hesitated. "Did he yell at you?" Mathew almost smiled. "Not exactly, but he didn't need to. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The father who never stayed long enough, and the son who learned to stop expecting him." Then Robert said, "He talks to me like I'm not broken." Mathew's chest tightened. He moved closer, lowering himself onto the couch beside him. "You're not broken," he said. "You've been carrying too much weight for someone your age. That's on me." His voice wavered, honesty cracking through the calm. "I thought giving you everything would be enough, but I forgot to give you me." Robert stared at him, eyes wet but steady. "It's not too late," he said quietly. "It's just late." That sentence stayed with Mathew for days. He started canceling meetings. First one, then two, then the entire week's schedule. His board didn't understand, and his assistant panicked, but he didn't care. For the first time in years, he drove Robert to school himself. He waited outside the gate longer than necessary, watching his son roll into the building under a gray sky. The sight was small but seismic. At dinner, he asked questions that weren't about grades or tutors. "Did you make any friends? Do you still like that history teacher? What's your favorite part of the day?" Robert answered cautiously at first, as if testing the reality of this new version of his father. But soon, something softened. Their conversations grew slower, warmer. The distance between them, once miles of silence, shrank to something human. One evening, Robert wheeled into the study while Mathew sat surrounded by half-read reports. "Dad? Yes?" Robert hesitated. "You look tired. Maybe you could skip a meeting tomorrow. We could go to the park instead." Mathew looked at his son, the boy who had learned to ask for scraps of attention like favors. He closed his laptop. "Yeah," he said, "let's do that." The next day, the two of them sat by the lake, watching the ripples play with the wind. Robert told him about Alessandro's lessons, how he compared fixing engines to fixing people. "He says most problems aren't from what's broken," Robert said. "They're from what people refuse to replace." Mathew smiled faintly. "He's not wrong." When they returned home, Mathew checked his phone out of habit. There were 43 unread emails, 7 missed calls, and 1 text from Carmen. "The investors are furious." He looked at it for a long time, then turned the screen face down. Robert noticed but said nothing. Instead, he just grinned and asked, "So, what's for dinner?" For the first time in years, Mathew didn't have a meeting to rush to. He cooked. It wasn't perfect, the pasta overcooked, the sauce too thick. But when Robert laughed through a mouthful of it, Mathew realized something simple and absolute. This was what had been missing all along. Later that night, when the city lights blinked like a pulse beneath the windows, Mathew opened his old briefcase. The envelope from Alessandro was still there, untouched. He took it out, tore it in half, and dropped it into the trash. Then he looked out over the skyline, the words still echoing in his mind. "You don't throw cash at a kid's dignity. You show up. You stay." For the first time, he understood what staying meant. It wasn't presence on paper. It was presence in the room, messy, unpolished, real. And as the city hummed below, Mathew Phillips, the man who had built an empire, finally began building something that mattered. Do you think true redemption begins with saying sorry, or with showing up and staying when it matters most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your answers might help someone trying to rebuild what money alone could never fix. The walls of Regency Hall had always gleamed. Polished marble floors, hand-painted ceilings, and windows so spotless they shimmered like water. But the shine was starting to crack. Whispers slid through corridors, faster than students, not about midterms or socials, but about the video. The video. Officially, the school referred to it as an incident. Unofficially, every student had seen it twice. Some watched it on loop in locker rooms, pausing at the moment Alessandro said, "Move. Now." Others passed it around in class group chats, adding fire emojis and captions like, "Better than a Marvel movie." And the administration? They panicked. A week after the video exploded online, Principal Keeley issued a statement at morning assembly. "Recent footage circulating online has been heavily edited," she said, voice thin and brittle over the PA. "It fails to capture the full context of what occurred." The moment she finished, half the cafeteria rolled their eyes. Some even laughed. The kids knew better. Every angle had been posted, some by students, some by parents, some by news crews. You couldn't edit what the whole world had already seen. Mathew Phillips sat in the back row of the assembly hall, disguised behind tinted glasses and a pulled-down cap. He hadn't planned to attend, but after hearing the school's statement in the car, he canceled his morning meetings and arrived without warning. His jaw tightened at every word the principal said. Not once did she mention Robert by name. Not once did she acknowledge the deeper issue. Later that day, while sipping bitter coffee in the parent lounge, Mathew sent a message to his legal team. "Draft a document, no school branding, anonymous. I want full responses from the student body about misconduct, bullying, faculty negligence. And make sure it lands on every phone in that school by tomorrow morning. Within hours, a private firm had the framework ready. It was secure, invisible to faculty, and live. The survey spread like wildfire. It started as a whisper, then a ripple, then a tidal wave. Students clicked out of boredom at first, then disbelief. The questions were raw. Have you ever been physically threatened? Did a teacher ever ignore your complaint? Have you ever seen a student harmed, filmed, or humiliated? The anonymity made honesty easy. By lunch, Mathew's phone buzzed with a preliminary report. 50% response rate. 97% completion. And then the number that stopped him cold. 1 in 3 students had experienced verbal, physical, or psychological abuse in the past 2 semesters. Many included names, details, timestamps. Some even uploaded screenshots. Others recorded voice memos too painful to type. Carmen, his assistant, called breathlessly. You're going to want to see the full report. Mathew already was. Page after page scrolled by. Complaints buried, slurs ignored. Teachers who looked the other way. Some of the most damaging stories had nothing to do with Robert. They came from students who didn't have rich parents or viral clips to save them. The ones who had learned to suffer quietly in uniform. Regency Hall's illusion of prestige was collapsing, and Mathew was the one pulling at the thread. That evening, the school board gathered for an emergency meeting. They expected a scolding, a few PR notes, maybe a donation from the Phillips Foundation to calm the press. But what they got instead was silence, until Mathew walked in. No tie, no entourage, just a printed copy of the student survey, 136 pages thick, dropped with a heavy thud on the long oak table. Your video statement was pathetic, he said, voice like cut glass. This isn't about editing. This is about a culture you've allowed to fester for years. The room fell still. One board member, a woman in pearls and panic, cleared her throat. We've addressed the matter. We're forming a committee. No, Mathew said sharply. You're not forming anything, you're listening. He opened the binder, flipping to a highlighted paragraph. 8th grade girl, cornered in a locker room, recorded. No disciplinary action, no follow-up. He turned the page. 7th grade boy, slapped by upperclassmen. Principal said, boys will be boys. His hand slammed the table. That ends. Today. The headmaster tried to speak. Mathew raised a finger. Save it. He turned to the board. You've spent years grooming an image while ignoring the infection beneath it. Well, the image is gone, the city knows, and so do your donors. The room stirred uncomfortably. Someone pulled out a phone, checking, confirming. It was true. Corporate sponsors were withdrawing. One alumni donor had already gone public, pulling a $500,000 pledge and citing institutional rot. I could have gone to the press, Mathew continued. But I gave you a chance to face the truth, not hide from it. He leaned in. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to accept full responsibility. You're going to issue a real apology. And you're going to implement a 5-step reform plan, starting with independent investigations and a new disciplinary protocol. He dropped a folder on the table. Already drafted. The board sat stunned. No one argued. Not this time. And if you don't, Mathew added, I'll make sure every student's story hits the front page. I have the funds, I have the reach. And after what you let happen to my son, I have the motive. The silence afterward was thick and suffocating. A school built on silence had finally met a man who refused to be quiet. Outside, the rain had returned, tapping against the windows like applause. Inside, the board voted unanimously. Reform passed. Investigations launched. Parents were notified. For the first time, the school didn't send out a glossy newsletter. It sent out an apology. Robert found out later that night. He sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the statement on his tablet. His eyes moved slowly across the screen. Then he looked up. Did you do this? He asked. Mathew paused, pouring tea. We did, he said. You started it when you didn't fall apart. Robert smiled faintly. So, what happens now? Mathew sat across from him, shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been in years. Now we build something better. Together. The room was packed wall to wall, reporters scribbling notes, cameras blinking red, and whispers slicing through the tension like knives. Everyone had questions. None of them expected answers from this man. When Mathew Phillips entered the conference hall at the downtown Civic Center, it wasn't behind a team of lawyers or flanked by PR handlers. It was beside his son Robert, and standing just behind them, arms crossed, expression carved from stone, was Alessandro Trevor. The podium bore the logo of Phillips Innovations, but Mathew looked smaller than usual beneath it. More human, less titan. The light caught the silver at his temples. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled, voice steady but low. "Before we begin," he said, eyes sweeping the crowd, "I want to make something clear. This isn't a corporate statement. It's a personal one. Because this time, the issue wasn't in a boardroom, it was in a classroom." Murmurs rippled across the crowd. Cameras zoomed tighter. Mathew placed a hand gently on Robert's shoulder, grounding himself before continuing. 2 weeks ago, my son was targeted by bullies at his school. He was humiliated in public. And while the internet saw a moment of justice in how that incident ended, what most missed was the failure that led to it. He exhaled. "That failure was mine." Alessandro, ever the shadow at Mathew's back, said nothing. But his presence made the words hit harder. It was a man like him, once feared, now forgotten, who stepped in when no one else did. Mathew knew it, and now the world would too. "I've spent years building things. Products, markets, influence," Mathew said. "I told myself I was securing my son's future. But what good is a future if the present is unbearable?" His voice cracked slightly but held. "What good is money if your child is suffering alone, unheard, unseen?" Flashbulbs went off. Reporters stopped scribbling. They were listening now, not to a CEO, but to a father unraveling his armor in real time. Mathew cleared his throat, eyes locking on a distant point in the crowd. "So I'm making some changes. Effective immediately, I am stepping back from my role as CEO of Phillips Innovations for the next 6 months." The crowd erupted in gasps and stunned whispers. Even Alessandro's brow lifted slightly. "I'll be using that time to launch a citywide initiative," Mathew continued, pushing forward. "One dedicated to protecting children who, like my son, have felt invisible, who have been mocked, ignored, or recorded for sport. I'm calling it the Stand Initiative. Because every child deserves someone who will stand for them, especially when no one else does." Robert turned to him, surprised, then smiled quietly. It was small but true, the kind of smile that doesn't need translation. Alessandro didn't smile, but something in his posture relaxed. Mathew reached into his coat pocket and held up a check. $10 million, he said. "That's my starting contribution, not to the school, not to branding, to real resources, legal defense funds for victims, mental health services, on-call advocates in schools. This money will go where the silence has lived the longest." A reporter in the front row raised her hand, stunned. "Mr. Phillips, are you saying you're bypassing Regency Hall entirely?" "I'm saying I'm done asking broken systems to fix themselves," Mathew said firmly. "If an institution fails a child, it doesn't deserve to decide the terms of repair." Another reporter fired a question. "What do your investors think?" Mathew chuckled. "Just once, humorless. They think I've lost my mind, that I'm gambling legacy for a headline." He looked at Robert. "But this boy is the only legacy I care about now. Let them panic. I'll be busy showing up." The crowd erupted in applause, some hesitant, some thunderous. Alessandro didn't clap, but he nodded once, slowly. In his world, words meant little. Action did the speaking. And this was the first time Mathew Phillips had truly spoken. Another hand shot up. "Mr. Trevor, are you officially involved in this initiative?" Alessandro didn't move. For a beat, the silence thickened. Then he stepped up to the mic. "I'm not interested in speeches," he said. "But if this man's willing to stand where he once sat silent, I'll back him." His voice was gravel and fire. "I don't do politics, I don't do donors, but I know how to teach people to stand." He turned to Robert. "And I never leave a job unfinished." Robert beamed. His eyes shone like city lights after rain. For the first time in months, he wasn't a headline or a target. He was part of something bigger. As the press conference ended, Mathew bent toward his son and whispered, "You okay?" Robert grinned. "Yeah," he said. "You didn't embarrass me too much." Mathew laughed. "High praise." They turned toward the exit together. Alessandro walked slightly behind. Still the guardian, still the ghost. But in that moment, The three of them weren't standing as strangers. They were something else entirely. A survivor, a protector, and a father finally learning how to show up. Outside, reporters called after them. What's next? Where can people donate? Who's the board chair of this initiative? Mathew paused, turning back just enough to answer. There is no board, he said. Not yet. Just people who refuse to stay silent. Then they walked into the daylight, three unlikely allies, bound not by blood, but by choice. The fire that had once raged inside the halls of Regency Hall hadn't gone out. It had simply changed direction. With the video exposed, the public apologies issued, and the stand initiative in motion, the bullies who once ruled the school now found themselves exiled. Jason Dunn and Caleb Fry, once untouchable sons of legacy donors, were now just two angry boys with too much time and bruised egos. Their fathers tried hush-money handshakes behind closed doors, but no check could undo humiliation, especially not the kind that played in 4K across every platform in the country. For weeks, Jason stayed quiet. But revenge, when brewed long enough, doesn't always explode. It simmers. And one late afternoon outside of Park Station Mall, that simmer boiled over. Robert had just finished browsing the electronics store, wheeling himself toward the plaza fountain when he spotted the familiar shadow, taller now, face tighter with resentment. Jason leaned against a pillar like it owed him something, a phone in one hand and a dare in his eyes. Well, well, he sneered. Look who's brave without a crowd now. Robert paused but didn't stop. His new chair barely made a sound as it pivoted to face him. That's funny, he said calmly. You only ever acted tough with a crowd. Jason's smirk twitched. Robert didn't flinch. What's the plan now? Another video? Another shove? Didn't learn the first time, or are you just that bored now? A small group of teens nearby slowed their steps. One held up a phone, ready. But for once, not to record humiliation, but something else. Jason straightened. His fists curled, but his swagger faltered. Robert's voice was too steady, too sharp. You know the difference between you and me? Robert said. You needed an audience. I just needed to stop caring what they thought. Jason opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Whatever fire he brought with him flickered, died. And in that quiet second, everything shifted. A few feet away, leaning by the edge of a parked truck, Alessandro watched with arms folded. He hadn't moved once, not when Jason stepped forward, not when Robert fired back. His face was unreadable, but in his eyes, there was something new. Not pride, not relief, respect. Across the lot, Mathew stood beside a small pop-up bookstore, half hiding behind a display of local authors. His phone was out, but he wasn't filming. He was watching, hands still, chest tight. He'd promised himself he wouldn't intervene, not unless he had to. But he didn't. His son didn't just hold his ground, he owned it. Jason finally turned, mumbling something under his breath as he stalked away. No threats, no fists, just silence, the loudest surrender. Robert watched him go, then turned his chair and rolled toward the benches near the fountain. A kid nearby clapped once. Another gave him a thumbs up. Robert didn't react. He just exhaled and let the moment settle. Alessandro stepped out from the truck, walking toward the bench like a shadow taking shape. Handled yourself, he said. Robert looked up. He's not scary without backup. He never was, Alessandro replied. You just didn't know that yet. Robert smiled. I do now. From the edge of the plaza, Mathew approached slowly, waiting for the right beat. When he got close enough, Alessandro nodded toward the outdoor cafe just across the street. You got 5 minutes? He asked. Mathew gave a wry smile. For you? Maybe even 6. They walked in silence, ordering 2 black coffees and settling into rusted metal chairs beneath a striped umbrella. The noise of the plaza buzzed around them, traffic, laughter, footsteps, but their table felt suspended in its own gravity. 2 men, one past, one future, bound by a boy who had learned to stand while sitting down. Mathew stirred his coffee but didn't sip. He surprises me, Alessandro shrugged. That's what kids do when you stop telling them who to be. Mathew leaned back. I used to think showing up with everything was enough. Turns out I kept showing up with everything except me. Alessandro didn't respond right away. His gaze lingered on the steam curling from his cup. I wasn't a father either, he said finally. Not when it counted. Too much fire. Too many lines I swore I wouldn't cross, until it was too late. Mathew studied him. Someone gave you a reason to try again? Someone needed me to, Alessandro said. And I failed him. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was shared. Mathew nodded slowly. You think this, what we're doing now, can be enough? For who? Alessandro asked. For them. For the kids who never got someone to step in. Alessandro sipped his coffee. It won't fix what's broken. But maybe it teaches the next ones that broken isn't the end. Mathew sat with that. Across the plaza, Robert was laughing with another boy near the fountain. His guard down. His shoulders relaxed. Not because someone was shielding him, but because he no longer needed a shield. That's the first time I've seen him laugh like that since the accident, Mathew said softly. Alessandro looked over. Then you're finally watching. The coffee cooled between them. The sun dipped behind a tower of glass and steel. Neither man stood right away. There was too much peace in sitting. When they finally did rise, Mathew extended a hand, not out of formality, but out of something deeper. Alessandro looked at it for a beat before gripping it tight. No words, no promises, just presence. The garage was quieter these days. The buzz of online fame had long faded into white noise, and most people moved on to newer headlines. But inside the walls of Trevor & Sons, the rhythm remained the same. Metal against metal, oil under nails, silence between thoughts. Alessandro still arrived before sunrise, and stayed until the shadows grew long. But something about him had shifted, subtle, like a man standing 1 inch closer to peace. It was Robert who finally asked. Not during one of their usual wrench-passing silences, but over a shared bag of half-warm empanadas one rainy afternoon. Can I ask you something? Robert said. Careful but firm. Alessandro didn't look up from the alternator he was cleaning. You just did. Robert gave a half-smile. Who were you before this? The rag in Alessandro's hand froze. The question hung in the air, heavier than usual. For a moment, Robert thought he'd overstepped. But then Alessandro exhaled, long and slow, like a man cracking a door he'd once locked shut. You sure you want the long version? He asked. Robert nodded. Alessandro leaned against the bench, wiping grease from his fingers. I was 17 when I buried my father. 2 days later, I put on a suit that didn't fit and swore loyalty to the man who paid for the funeral. He paused. They called him Don Trevi. He wasn't blood, but in our world, that didn't matter. You earned family. He spoke slowly, like each memory had teeth. I started small, running envelopes, watching doors. But I rose fast. Too fast. Because I didn't flinch, didn't ask questions, and I knew how to make silence work in a room full of noise. His voice dropped a note. By 25, they called me the Shadow Bishop, because I never played flashy, but I always moved first. Robert watched him quietly, wide-eyed. I never touched civilians, Alessandro continued. That was my line. No women, no kids. Just deals, debt, and anyone who thought they were untouchable. His jaw clenched. But lines blur when you play the game too long. He paused, eyes drifting to the far wall, where the faded photo of a boy still hung. His name was Leo. He wasn't my son, not by blood, but he was mine. Robert tilted his head. What happened to him? Alessandro swallowed hard. Leo saw something he wasn't supposed to. A trade. A beating. I don't even remember the details. He came to me with tears in his eyes, said the men scared him. I told him I'd handle it. He rubbed his forehead with a trembling hand. But I didn't want to rock the wrong boat. I waited. I told myself I'd fix it tomorrow. Robert's throat tightened. What happened? Alessandro looked down. They found him in the river 2 days later. Said it was an accident. I knew better. His voice turned rough. I'd stayed quiet one day too long. I promised myself I'd never do it again. Silence settled between them, deep and reverent. Robert didn't fill it, he let it breathe. That's why I stepped in that day, Alessandro finally said. When I saw those boys around you laughing, pushing, I saw Leo. I saw me too. The me that didn't move fast enough. Robert blinked back, something sharp in his eyes. You didn't freeze this time. No, Alessandro said. I didn't. A week later, Mathew showed up at the garage again, this time without any hidden motives or envelopes in his pocket. He stood awkwardly at the entrance, watching Robert and Alessandro laugh over a busted fender like it was an inside joke. It took a full minute for Alessandro to notice him, another 10 seconds to acknowledge him. You here to apologize again? He asked, half smirking. Mathew chuckled. No, I'm here to offer you something. Alessandro raised an eyebrow. If it's a job, I already have one. Not that kind, Mathew replied. We're expanding the stand initiative. I want you to run the mentorship and protection wing, oversee security, train the mentors, build something that outlives us both. Alessandro leaned back. You want the ex-underboss of a crime syndicate to babysit kids? I want the man who taught my son how to stand, Mathew said. Alessandro didn't answer right away. He walked to the workbench, picked up a socket wrench, and turned it over in his hands. That life, the one I left, still follows me. You sure the parents of these kids can stomach that? Mathew nodded. They don't have to. The kids will. Still, Alessandro didn't give an answer. Not then. Instead, he stared out the window, where the rain had begun to fall again, streaking the glass with silver lines. Ask me again when the noise dies down, he said. When it's just the work left. Mathew smiled. Fair enough. Before he left, he turned once more at the door. You ever think about what you'd be if you weren't that guy from the past? Alessandro shrugged. I think about who Leo would have been. That night, Robert opened his journal and wrote a single sentence. The strongest people aren't the ones who fight. They're the ones who refuse to fall the same way twice. In the quiet of his garage, Alessandro looked at the old photo again. He didn't touch it this time. He just nodded once, like a promise had been made and kept. Then he turned out the lights. I protect the weak, but the strong? They gotta earn that title. The banner outside Regency Hall had changed. Gone were the Latin phrases and marble letters carved into false perfection. In their place hung a navy and gold cloth that read, Regency Hall, a place to rise. It was a small thing, but symbolic, an admission that the old ways had fallen. Underneath the rebranding was something far more meaningful. Policies rewritten, staff replaced, a newly appointed student advocacy board. Not everything was fixed, but for the first time in years, the school wasn't pretending there was nothing broken. It had taken more than money to get here. It took stories, real ones, told by students who were no longer afraid to speak. Donors had pulled out, yes, but new ones came in, quiet ones who understood that real change never starts in a boardroom. It starts in a hallway, between lockers, with a kid deciding to no longer look away. Robert had watched it all unfold from a distance, mostly through a screen. But today, he wasn't watching. He was rolling back through the front gates of the school that once taught him to shrink. Only this time, he wasn't arriving in silence. His father walked beside him, holding nothing but his son's bag. No chauffeur, no briefcase, just presence. The campus had changed too. New murals covered the gym wall, one of them painted by a student who used to eat alone behind the equipment shed. There were posters everywhere. No bystanders, no silence. It was a far cry from the whispers and iPhone recordings of a month ago. Now, when students pulled out their phones, it was to share stories, not shame. Robert's new chair moved like it was built for the space it once didn't belong in. Each turn smooth, each bump absorbed by custom shocks Alessandro had welded himself. Every time the wheels spun forward, Robert felt it, not just motion, but purpose. He'd never been the loudest kid. But now he didn't have to be. He just had to be here. At the top of the front steps, a group of seniors clustered around a smaller boy. His backpack had been turned inside out, contents spilled across the pavement like spilled secrets. A few students laughed, the kind of dry, lazy cruelty that comes from those who've never been corrected. The boy's face was red, his hands shaking as he tried to gather his things. Robert rolled forward before Mathew could speak. He maneuvered around the group, not with speed, but certainty. Students noticed. Whispers started. The boy on the ground looked up just as Robert reached him. You good? Robert asked, voice calm, steady. The boy blinked. Nodded. Yeah, I think so. Robert leaned over, picking up a scattered notebook. You don't have to do this alone, he said, handing it back. One of the seniors shifted uncomfortably. Robert didn't even look at him. Try this again, he added quietly, and you won't have to worry about staff. He paused. You'll have to worry about me. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, wrapped in a voice that had learned from someone who never needed to raise his. The crowd dispersed slowly, some embarrassed, some unsure. But one thing was clear. Robert Phillips was not a target anymore. He was a line not to be crossed. The younger boy stood beside him, clutching his backpack with both hands. Thanks, he mumbled. Robert smiled. You've got your own strength. Sometimes it just takes someone else standing beside you to see it. From across the street, Mathew watched the whole thing. He hadn't stepped in. He hadn't needed to. His son was standing taller now than he ever had before, without rising from his chair. Next to him, leaning on a lamppost like he'd been there all morning, Alessandro Trevor stood with his arms crossed. No nods. No applause. Just a quiet exhale, like something had finally come full circle. Proud? Mathew asked, keeping his eyes on Robert. Alessandro didn't answer right away. Then, simply, yeah. Robert turned, sensing them both. His eyes scanned the street, found them, and for the first time since everything began, he smiled without fear. It wasn't just gratitude. It was understanding. A silent exchange between a boy, his father, and the man who refused to let him fall. Inside the school, the bell rang. Outside, the world kept moving. But somewhere between the laughter of new students and the hum of city traffic, a truth settled deep into the pavement. He didn't need saving anymore. He'd learned to stand tall, even while sitting down. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.